The night should have been quiet, just a soft glow from the kitchen window and the gentle hum of the refrigerator, but instead it split open like a wound. Emily Hart, 8 months pregnant and exhausted from a long day, stepped into her own living room, as if it were enemy territory. She had only come because the nanny called saying her toddler son was crying non-stop and begging for her. But what Emily heard the moment she pushed the door open wasn't her child's cry. It was laughter, sharp and cruel. Lena Brooks, the woman who had been hovering around Emily's husband for months, stood in the center of the room, wearing Emily's robe, as if she owned the place. And at her feet, trembling and confused, was little Noah, his cheeks wet and his tiny hands clutching the stuffed bear Emily gave him last Christmas. That sight alone should have shattered Emily. But what came next broke something deeper. Something she didn't even know could break. Lena smirked, lifted her heel, and with a slow, deliberate motion, pressed it against Emily's swollen stomach. The pressure wasn't accidental. It was intentional, cold, and vicious, in a way only a woman determined to replace another could manage. Emily gasped, grabbing the edge of the coffee table to steady herself, her pulse thundering in her ears. Noah screamed, stumbling toward her, but Lena shoved him back with a flick of her wrist and a chilling "stay away, kid." Emily tried to speak, but her voice cracked under the weight of shock and pain, a deep ache blooming from inside her abdomen. The air tasted metallic, the world losing color as she swayed, fighting the instinct to collapse. Lena leaned in, her whisper, a venomous thread. "You should have stayed gone, Emily." That was when Emily realized the betrayal went deeper than infidelity. This was an eviction from her own life. Her husband Mark had chosen Lena long before tonight, and now she was being pushed out like an unwanted shadow. Emily staggered backward, clutching her stomach, her breath sharp as lightning. Pain shot through her lower body. She tasted panic, fear, and something even darker, the knowledge that she might be losing the baby she had dreamed of for years. Noah wailed louder, but his cries were swallowed by the sound of Emily's heartbeat pounding like a drum against the walls. Just when the room tilted and her vision blurred, the front door slammed open so hard it shook the frame. Heavy boots thundered across the hardwood floor, and a voice Emily hadn't heard in months roared through the house with the force of a storm. It was her oldest brother Daniel, his face a mask of fury, as he took in the scene, the trembling toddler, the woman in his sister's robe, and Emily herself collapsing against the wall. Behind him came the other two brothers, Michael and Aaron, both wide-eyed, breathless, and already moving toward Emily. Daniel's voice cracked the air again, deeper and more dangerous than Emily had ever heard. "What did you do to her?" Lena stepped back, her confidence slipping for the first time, but the damage had already been carved into Emily's body. Emily's knees buckled, her breath hitching as she felt warmth spreading down her legs, and the terror in Daniel's eyes told her the truth before she could speak it. She was bleeding fast, and the room spun as her brothers rushed toward her, their shouts echoing like alarms in a burning building. Emily reached for Noah, desperate to protect him, even as her world slipped into darkness. Emily Hart had always been the kind of woman who apologized even when she had done nothing wrong. At 31, she carried the quiet tenderness of someone who grew up keeping the peace in every room she entered. She worked as a medical receptionist at a small clinic in Brooklyn, where patients often told her she felt like a warm cup of coffee on a cold morning. Emily never saw herself that way, but kindness was the one thing she had never learned to turn off. Before her marriage began to crack, Emily believed Mark was the safe choice, the steady man who would never let her fall. He was 6 years older, a financial analyst who dressed in crisp shirts and spoke in calm, measured tones. When they first met at a summer barbecue hosted by mutual friends, he offered her a bottle of sparkling water and listened to her talk about her dreams, with surprising patience. For a while, Emily thought she had finally found someone who valued gentle things. But over time, small disappointments began to gather like dust in corners. Mark started working late, claiming deadlines, then coming home with the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume. Emily convinced herself it was harmless, that he was simply stressed or tired. When he snapped at her for forgetting to pick up his dry cleaning, or for serving dinner too early, she took the blame as she always had. She told herself every marriage had rough spots, that love meant being patient even when it hurt. The truth was that Emily had been lonely long before Lena appeared. She spent evenings humming lullabies to her toddler, folding tiny socks and waiting for footsteps that never arrived on time. She wrote reminders on sticky notes to make Mark's life easier, left meals warming in the oven, and kept her voice soft, so nothing she said would ever sound like a complaint. She carried the house, the child, and the hope that one day Mark would look at her the way he used to. Her pregnancy had only deepened the distance. While Emily dreamed of a family united, Mark seemed distracted, often slipping out to meet with clients or grab a drink with coworkers. She noticed he guarded his phone, turning it face down whenever she walked by. Once she heard him laughing in the hallway, a warm laugh she hadn't heard in months, and when she stepped closer, he hung up as if burned. Emily told herself not to worry, but her heart felt like a window, slowly cracking under pressure. Still, Emily held on. She believed families were worth fighting for even when the fight was quiet and one-sided. She read pregnancy books late at night, her fingers tracing the pages the way she wished someone would trace the curve of her hand. She wrote letters to her unborn child, promising love, protection, and a life filled with gentleness. She prayed Mark would return to her emotionally, that he would wake up one morning and remember the woman who once made him smile without effort. But deep inside, Emily sensed a storm coming. Her intuition whispered warnings she tried to silence. Some nights she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized herself. The tired eyes, the forced smile, the loneliness she carried like an invisible bruise. She wanted to believe everything would heal after the baby arrived. She wanted to trust Mark again. Yet something felt wrong in a way she couldn't name, a chill that crept into her chest and refused to leave. It grew inside. The Hart home sat on a quiet block in Brooklyn, the kind of neighborhood where porch lights glowed softly at night and neighbors still waved when taking out the trash. To anyone passing by, the house looked warm and peaceful, fresh paint on the shutters, a small garden Emily tended with care, and a wind chime her mother had given her before she passed. But inside, the atmosphere had been shifting for months, like a room losing oxygen. What once felt like a sanctuary had slowly turned into a place where Emily walked on eggshells, afraid to breathe, too loudly afraid to disturb whatever invisible line Mark kept drawing around himself. Most evenings, the living room held a soft lamplight, children's books scattered on the rug, and the faint scent of lavender from the diffuser Emily used to calm her nerves. She tried to make the house feel like a home for Noah, who loved toddling around with his wooden blocks and dancing to soft music. Yet Emily felt the tension lingering in the air, a heaviness she couldn't quite explain but could feel pressing down on her chest. Mark would sit on the couch, scrolling his phone with a tight jaw, ignoring the soft questions she asked about his day. He seemed present in body but gone in spirit, drifting farther each night. The kitchen, once their favorite room, had become a reminder of everything that was slipping away. Emily still cooked Mark's favorite meals, hoping they might bring him back to her even just for a moment. She would stand at the stove stirring pasta sauce, listening to the hiss of boiling water, praying he might wander in and wrap his arms around her like he used to. But instead, Mark often breezed through only long enough to grab a drink before disappearing again, leaving Emily staring at the empty doorway, her heart sinking a little more each time. Outside, the home life moved differently. The clinic where Emily worked felt bright and steady, with sunlight spilling through the windows and patients greeting her with sincere smiles. She loved her job, the gentle buzz of the front desk, the way children clung to their parents' hands, the comforting routine of paperwork and conversations. Work made her feel useful, calm, and appreciated. It was the one place where she didn't feel like she was slowly fading into the background. Mark's world, on the other hand, thrived in noise and ambition. He worked in a sleek office tower in Manhattan, with glass walls, stainless steel elevators, and views of the skyline that made people feel small. Emily had visited once for a holiday gathering, standing awkwardly in her modest dress, while Mark's colleagues sipped champagne and discussed stock tickers and weekend trips to the Hamptons. She remembered feeling out of place, but tried to brush it off, telling herself she didn't need luxury to feel worthy. On weekends, when Mark claimed he was working, Emily pushed Noah's stroller through Central Park, soaking in the breeze, the rustling leaves, the distant sound of street musicians. She wished Mark would join them, wished he would take pictures of her laughing with their son the way other fathers did. She wished their life felt more connected, less fragile, less uncertain. But each passing week made the distance feel wider, as if Mark's world was rising higher, while hers stayed grounded in a place he no longer wanted to be. Still, Emily clung to hope. She believed home could be healed, that love could be rebuilt, that Mark might return if she loved him enough. But hope can blind even the strongest heart, and Emily didn't see the storm forming just outside her walls. It was already moving toward her. Mark Hart had not always been a villain, but somewhere along the way, the man Emily married disappeared behind the cold, polished mask he wore now. At 37, he was tall, well-groomed, and confident in a way that made people trust him instantly. But underneath that calm exterior lived a man who feared failure more than anything, a man who wanted success, even if it meant grinding others beneath his shoes. His job at the Manhattan firm fed that hunger, surrounding him with people who measured loyalty in profits and relationships in advantages. That was exactly where Lena Brooks entered his life, slipping into the gaps Emily never noticed widening. Unlike Emily, Lena was bold, sharp, and unafraid to demand what she wanted. She worked in the building across from Mark's office, a marketing consultant with a reputation for being fierce and relentless. Lena had grown up wealthy, used to getting her way, and she carried herself like someone who believed the world existed for her convenience. When she learned Mark was married, she didn't step back. Instead, she saw it as a challenge. She whispered flattery into his insecurities, praised his ambition, and made him feel like a man more powerful than he truly was. Mark mistook manipulation for admiration, letting Lena slip deeper into his life. Lena's influence grew quickly, and soon she convinced Mark that Emily was holding him back. She planted seeds telling him that Emily lacked drive, that she didn't fit the image of the man he wanted to become. At first, Mark resisted, remembering Emily's soft smile, her steady love, the way she supported him through every setback. But Lena chipped away at his loyalty until his guilt dulled. She filled his days with attention and his nights with temptation, each moment tightening her grip. When she realized she was pregnant, she decided Emily had to be erased entirely. In Lena's mind, there wasn't enough space for two women in Mark's life. There was only room for her. Mark didn't know how dangerous Lena truly was. She began tracking Emily's schedule, watching her movements, even showing up in places Emily frequented just to observe her. Lena saw Emily's kindness as weakness, her gentleness as something pathetic. She wanted control of everything: Mark's home, Mark's money, Mark's future. She whispered lies that painted Emily as unstable, telling Mark she feared for his safety if Emily became emotional during her pregnancy. Slowly, Lena twisted reality until Mark doubted the woman who had once been his anchor. By the time Lena moved into the house behind Emily's back, Mark was too lost in her influence to see the darkness creeping closer. The final shift came when Lena convinced Mark that Emily's unborn child threatened their future. She claimed the baby would tie him to a woman who would drain him financially and emotionally, and Mark, desperate to reinvent himself, listened. Lena pushed harder, telling him that Emily's quiet nature made her unfit for the life he wanted. Mark justified his betrayal, convincing himself he deserved happiness, even if it meant destroying his wife. He didn't know Lena had orchestrated everything, nor that her obsession had grown into something dangerous. He had no idea the woman he trusted was about to shatter his world as violently as she shattered Emily's. And while Mark remained blinded by ambition and desire, none of them realized that the lies, secrets, and quiet cruelties tightening around their lives were about to explode into a disaster far more brutal than anyone could have predicted, a moment that would change every one of them forever. Tonight, chaos erupted the moment Daniel caught Emily as she slid toward the floor, her breath coming in short, broken gasps. The quiet home Emily had kept so carefully was suddenly flooded with shouting footsteps and the sharp metallic smell of fear. Noah cried uncontrollably, reaching out for his mother as Michael lifted him into his arms, whispering that everything would be okay. But nothing felt okay. Emily clutched Daniel's shirt, her fingers trembling as she tried to speak, but the words dissolved into a whimper. Lena stood frozen near the couch, her face pale, her confidence cracked for the first time. Daniel's voice thundered through the room as he stepped toward Lena, demanding to know what she had done. She tried to respond, but the words tangled in her throat as if even her lies refused to come out. Aaron moved to block her path, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with the kind of fury only a brother could feel while watching his sister bleed. Emily's legs buckled again, and Daniel held her tighter, shouting for someone to call an ambulance. Michael, hands shaking, grabbed his phone and dialed, immediately pacing as he gave the operator their address. Emily felt the world slipping farther away, her vision fading into soft, shifting shapes. Every breath cut through her like broken glass. She could hear her brothers arguing with Lena, their voices sharp and panicked, but her own voice felt trapped beneath the weight of the pain pulsing through her lower body. She tried to focus on Noah's cries, the familiar sound anchoring her to the moment, but even that faded in and out like a distant echo. The warmth spreading down her legs grew heavier, and she knew she was losing blood too quickly. Terror crawled up her spine. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Daniel lifted Emily, carefully holding her, as if the slightest jolt might break her further. Michael kept Noah close, shielding the child's eyes from the sight of his mother's blood. Aaron remained planted in front of Lena, refusing to let her leave even an inch. Lena attempted to brush past him, insisting it was all an accident, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Daniel carried Emily toward the front door, murmuring to her that she needed to hold on, that help was coming, that she wasn't alone. When the paramedics burst inside, the room exploded into motion. They lowered Emily onto a stretcher, their hands moving quickly as they assessed her condition. One of them asked what had happened, but Aaron answered with a tight voice that they would explain everything at the hospital. Noah cried harder as they strapped Emily down, his tiny hands reaching for her, his face red with fear. Michael kissed the top of his head and promised they would follow the ambulance. Daniel walked beside the stretcher as they carried her out, refusing to let her out of his sight for even a moment. Outside, cold night air brushed against Emily's cheeks as the paramedics loaded her into the back of the ambulance. Her brothers climbed in behind her, their faces tight with fear, their bodies tense, as if bracing for the worst. Noah's cries echoed from Michael's arms as he hurried toward their car. Lena stood alone on the porch, shaking, realizing too late that everything had spiraled beyond her control. Daniel held Emily's hand inside the ambulance, whispering for her to stay awake. Emily tried to respond, but her eyes fluttered, her strength fading. Then her pulse weakened so suddenly. Inside the bright ambulance, Emily drifted in and out of consciousness, her breath shallow and shaky as the paramedics worked swiftly around her. Daniel sat beside the stretcher, gripping her hand as if he could anchor her to the world by sheer force of will. Aaron hovered close, watching every movement the paramedics made, his jaw tighten with fear he refused to show. Emily heard pieces of their voices, distant and muffled, floating through the haze of pain. Someone said her blood pressure was dropping too fast. Someone else mentioned internal bleeding, and another voice urged them to increase the fluids. None of it felt real. The world had become a blur of flashing lights and urgent hands. As the ambulance sped through Manhattan streets, Emily tried to hold on to something familiar, but every memory flickered like a dying light. She remembered Noah's laughter earlier that morning, the way he pressed his sticky fingers against her cheek, whispering "Mama," like it was the only word he ever needed. She remembered touching her unborn baby's kicks, imagining the little face she had dreamed of for months. But now each memory came with a sharp ache, a fear that she might never feel those moments again. Her vision dimmed as the pain surged, and she clutched Daniel's hand tighter, silently pleading not to fade. At the hospital entrance, the doors burst open, and the paramedics rushed her inside. Nurses and doctors surrounded her, instantly shouting instructions, moving equipment, assessing her rapidly. Daniel and Aaron were pushed back as the medical team wheeled her toward the emergency room. The brothers tried to follow, but a nurse blocked them gently, telling them they had to wait outside until the surgical team evaluated her condition. Daniel protested, his voice cracking, but the nurse insisted. With no choice, they watched helplessly as Emily disappeared behind the swinging doors. Michael arrived moments later, holding Noah, his eyes red from fear and frustration. He demanded updates, but his brothers could offer nothing but anxious silence. Noah kept calling for his mother, reaching his tiny hands toward the hallway where she had vanished. Daniel lifted the child into his arms, trying to comfort him, but Noah cried harder, sensing the fear around him. Minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity. The brothers paced the waiting area, their emotions raw and unfiltered. Michael punched the vending machine, cursing himself for not being there sooner. Aaron leaned against the wall, fists clenched, repeatedly replaying the image of Lena standing over Emily. Daniel sat with Noah in his lap, whispering prayers he hadn't spoken since childhood. They all feared the same unspoken truth: Emily might not survive the night. Finally, a doctor approached them with a grave expression. He explained that Emily had lost significant blood and required emergency surgery. They were fighting to stabilize her, but the outcome was uncertain. The words felt like knives. Daniel asked if she could be seen before surgery, but the doctor shook his head, already turning back toward the operating room. Suddenly, the waiting room door opened again, and a familiar voice called Daniel's name. It was their cousin Lucas, a trauma nurse, who happened to be on shift. He hurried toward them, eyes wide with urgency, saying he had seen Emily's chart, and there was something they all needed to know, something the doctors hadn't yet addressed. He glanced nervously over his shoulder, as if even speaking the truth out loud might cause the hallway walls to tremble with warning today. His voice lowered as he revealed it, concerned the baby's final heartbeat reading. Lucas lowered his voice, glancing around the corridor as if afraid someone might overhear. Daniel stepped closer, clutching Noah to his chest, while Michael and Aaron leaned in with tense, expectant faces. The hum of hospital machines filled the silence as Lucas cleared his throat, his expression tight with something heavier than fear. He told them the last fetal heartbeat reading, taken just minutes before Emily lost consciousness, didn't match the timeline she had told her obstetrician. The baby's size and rhythm suggested she had been farther along than her medical records showed. At first, the brothers didn't understand why that mattered, but then Lucas explained the part that made every muscle in Daniel's body turn to stone. According to the readings, Emily's baby had likely stopped receiving oxygen at least a minute before she collapsed. That meant her fall hadn't caused the fatal blow. It meant the impact came earlier. It meant someone had deliberately harmed her before she even reached the living room. Lucas emphasized that the fetal distress pattern pointed to external trauma, consistent with pressure applied to the abdomen. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face as the truth settled before him in a horrifying, undeniable line. Emily hadn't simply been attacked in a moment of rage. Lena had planned it. She had intended for the baby not to survive. Michael let out a shaky breath, his fists trembling. "She killed our nephew," he whispered, the realization slicing through him like a blade. Aaron paced back and forth, gripping his hair, his chest rising and falling with fury he could barely contain. Noah sensed the tension and began to whimper against Daniel's shirt, pressing his cheek into his uncle's shoulder. Daniel held him tightly, refusing to let the child witness the storm gathering around them. Before the brothers could respond, a sudden commotion stirred at the far end of the hallway. Voices rose, one firm, controlled, and dangerously familiar. Mark had arrived. He strode toward them in a crisp white shirt, acting as if he were a grieving husband rushing to his wife's side. But the moment he saw the brothers, the mask cracked. His expression hardened, jaw clenching, eyes flashing with annoyance rather than concern. He demanded to know where Emily was, insisting he needed to speak to the doctors immediately. Daniel stepped between him and the hallway, blocking his path. Mark tried to brush past him, but Daniel didn't budge. With a low voice edged in steel, he told Mark that Emily was in surgery, fighting for her life, and that they knew everything. Mark's eyes flickered with confusion, then panic, then so darker. He claimed he didn't understand what they meant. Tried to deflect, insisted Lena had called him, saying Emily showed up acting unstable. The brothers looked at him as if he were poison. Lucas stepped forward and told him the medical truth. The trauma to Emily's abdomen had happened before she walked into the living room, meaning someone had attacked her, intentionally, long before the confrontation. For the first time, Mark's expression faltered. A crack of fear broke through. He stepped back, adjusting his tie, looking anywhere except at the men surrounding him. Michael demanded to know where he had been that evening, why he hadn't answered Emily's calls, why he sounded more irritated than afraid. Mark stammered something he almost never did, spinning excuses about a work meeting that no one believed. But before they could press him further, a nurse rushed over, asking for Emily's emergency contact to sign a consent form. Daniel started forward immediately, but Mark shoved past him, insisting he was Emily's husband and had legal priority. The nurse hesitated, torn between protocol and the tension radiating around them. As she guided Mark toward the paperwork, Daniel forced himself to breathe, his hands shaking with rage he was barely controlling. Lucas turned to his cousins again, voice low. He said there was more, something he had seen in Emily's labs that made everything even worse. He warned that whatever they thought they knew about Mark's betrayal was only the beginning. Lucas pulled the brothers into a quieter corner of the hallway, his expression tightening with every second. He said Emily's blood tests showed elevated levels of a sedative she had never been prescribed. The dosage wasn't enough to knock her out completely, but it could weaken her, make her dizzy, lower her guard. Daniel felt his stomach twist as Lucas explained that the drug had likely been administered within the last 2 hours, meaning Emily had been targeted before she ever stepped inside the house. Michael muttered that Emily never took anything stronger than prenatal vitamins. Erin's hands curled into fists. Lucas continued, saying the pattern in her bloodstream pointed to the sedative being slipped into something she drank, likely the tea Lena had insisted Emily stopped by to pick up earlier that day. The weight of it all pressed on their chests like a stone. Mark returned from signing the paperwork, pretending concern, but his eyes darted around nervously. Daniel confronted him, immediately demanding to know whether he had known about the sedative. Mark snapped, asking what they were accusing him of, insisting he was the victim of their paranoia. But his voice cracked slightly, revealing a guilt he couldn't hide. Lucas stepped forward, laying out the lab results calmly but firmly. Mark's face drained of color. He tried to protest, but the words caught in his throat. Then Michael brought up another detail. Emily had mentioned feeling unusually tired after drinking a special herbal blend Lena had gifted her. Mark froze. It was all the confirmation they needed. Daniel's fury simmered dangerously, but Noah, clinging to his uncle's leg, reminded him to stay focused. Their priority was Emily's survival, not Mark's excuses. A doctor rushed down the hallway, informing them that Emily was still in surgery but stabilizing slowly. The brothers exhaled in collective relief, even though fear lingered heavily. Mark pushed forward, pretending to be the devoted husband. The doctor politely updated him, unaware of the tension. As soon as the doctor stepped away, Mark demanded that Lena be contacted, claiming she needed to know what was happening. Daniel nearly laughed at the audacity. He told Mark that Lena would be speaking to the police long before she spoke to him. That was when Mark's composure finally cracked. He barked that they were overreacting, that Emily brought drama on herself, and that Lena had nothing to do with this. The brothers stared at him in disbelief. It was as if Mark didn't realize how transparent his panic had become. Noah whimpered softly, sensing the anger in the air. Lucas suggested they gather every detail Emily had mentioned over the last few weeks. Odd behaviors, strange texts, sudden disappearances. Together, the brothers pieced together a timeline. Unexplained bruises Emily thought were from carrying groceries, sudden dizziness she blamed on pregnancy, the increasing pressure Mark placed on her to move out, and his recent insistence that they redraw the property deed. Each detail painted a picture far darker than any of them expected. Lucas said the sedative could have compromised Emily's balance, making her more vulnerable to an attack. The brothers felt a cold realization settle in. They weren't dealing with a moment of jealousy or rage, but a calculated plan. Then a security guard approached, saying someone insisted on seeing Mark. The brothers turned together, thick tension filling the corridor. Standing near the entrance, her hair wild and eyes frantic, was Lena. She pushed past the guard, shouting that she needed to speak to Mark immediately. Nurses turned their heads at the outburst. Mark stepped toward her, but Daniel blocked him, telling Lena she wasn't going anywhere. Lena's breath hitched. She looked at Mark, then at the brothers, and the panic in her eyes said everything. They were not the only ones who knew the truth. She whispered that Mark had promised her Emily wouldn't survive tonight. The hallway fell silent except for the distant hum of machines as Lena's confession hung in the air. Mark froze, his face draining of color, while Daniel stepped forward like a storm gathering strength. Nurses paused mid-stride, sensing something dangerous unfolding, but no one intervened. Lena clutched her purse with trembling fingers, her breath short and unsteady. She looked less like a rival and more like a trapped animal, realizing the cage had shut. Mark hissed her name, warning her to stop talking, but Lena shook her head violently. She said she wasn't going down alone. Mark lunged toward her, grabbing her wrist, but Aaron shoved him back so hard he hit the wall. Nurses gasped, but no one stepped closer. Mark tried to recover, smoothing his shirt, insisting Lena was hysterical. But she pushed past him and pointed at Daniel, saying Mark had promised her a clean start once Emily was out of the way. Daniel felt something inside him snap. Every sacrifice Emily had made, every moment she had waited alone, every bruise she had excused, now laid bare under fluorescent lights. Aaron demanded to know how far the plan went. Lena swallowed hard and admitted Mark said the sedative would weaken Emily enough to make the fall look accidental. Mark exploded, shouting that Lena was lying, but his voice cracked under the pressure. Daniel stepped closer, eyes filled with a rage simmering just beneath the surface. He reminded Mark that Emily was fighting for her life while he stood there arguing like a coward. Mark sneered, saying Emily had always been too fragile to handle real life, and that the brothers were overreacting. Michael stepped forward, fists clenched, telling Mark he had lost the right to speak about Emily. Lena backed away, muttering that Mark had led her to believe he wanted a future with her, and that she would never have agreed to anything violent if she had known the truth about his finances. Daniel asked sharply what finances she meant. Lena hesitated before admitting Mark had emptied one of his joint accounts and transferred funds into her name, promising they would start over once Emily was gone. Lucas overheard enough to step forward, warning Mark that financial manipulation during a medical crisis could lead to criminal charges. Mark swung at Daniel, but Aaron grabbed him, pinning him against the wall. Security arrived, but Daniel told them to wait, saying the truth needed to be heard. Lena began crying, saying Mark had told her Emily wouldn't survive, and that the sedative was supposed to make everything easier to cover up if an investigation happened. Mark's face changed, then not angry but terrified. He told Lena to stop talking, but she shook her head and whispered that she had proof he planned everything. Nurses exchanged glances as Mark lunged again, this time trying to silence her. But Daniel stepped between them, his voice low and dangerous. He told Mark that whatever happened next would not be handled in a hallway. Police were already on their way, called by Lucas the moment he saw the lab results. Mark froze as the brothers closed in around him. And just as sirens echoed outside the hospital doors, Lena reached into her purse for something that made every breath in the corridor halt. Everyone stiffened as Lena lifted a flash drive, its surface catching the hospital lights. She said it held recordings, messages, and transfers proving Mark's plan. Daniel stepped closer, stunned, as she whispered that Emily had been right to fear the people closest to her, all along truly dangerous ones. Everyone in the hallway stared at the tiny flash drive in Lena's shaking hand. It looked harmless, almost ordinary, but the weight of it pressed against the air like a loaded weapon. Daniel stepped forward, cautiously unsure whether to grab it or let her speak. Nurses paused at their stations. Even the security guards stood frozen, sensing that what came next would unravel the entire truth. Mark's face had drained of color, sweat collecting at his temples. He lunged toward Lena with a snarl, but Aaron shoved him back so hard he staggered into a chair. This time security moved closer, hands hovering near their belts, ready for anything. Lena's voice cracked as she explained that the flash drive contained recordings, voice messages where Mark complained about Emily being a burden, texts where he told Lena he wanted a future without loose ends, and even a financial spreadsheet showing the transfer of funds. She said she hadn't meant for anything to go this far, that Mark had promised everything would look like a natural pregnancy complication. No one knew whether she was telling the truth or protecting herself, but none of that mattered now. The evidence was real. The betrayal undeniable. Mark tried to speak, but every word that left his mouth sounded like panic. He claimed Lena edited the files. He insisted he was being framed, that Emily had emotional issues no one talked about. But his voice lacked conviction. His lies fell flat in the sterile hospital air. Daniel demanded the flash drive, but Lena hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Noah in Daniel's arms. Something in her expression softened remorse. Maybe fear, maybe a fleeting realization of how deeply she had damaged an innocent family. Finally, she placed the flash drive in Daniel's hand. It felt heavier than it should have. Lucas examined it quickly and said the type of encryption used suggested it hadn't been altered. Mark tried once more to reach for it, roaring that it was all fake, but two security guards grabbed him by the arms. Mark twisted and shouted that they had no right, that he was Emily's husband, that she would want him there. The brothers stared at him with disbelief. Even now he used Emily's name as a shield. Before the guards escorted him away, Mark spat that Emily would come crawling back once she healed. Daniel stepped forward, his jaw tight, telling Mark that Emily would never again share a life with someone who viewed her as disposable. Mark's expression shifted from anger to desperation. He tried to break free, but the guards tightened their grip. As he was dragged down the hallway, Mark screamed Lena's name, accusing her of betraying him. Lena crumpled against the wall, sobbing into her hands. For the first time, she appeared human, not the calculating woman who had tormented Emily, but someone drowning in consequences she hadn't expected. Just then, a doctor rushed toward the family, breathless. Daniel held Noah tightly, bracing himself. The doctor said Emily had survived surgery barely, but she was stable enough to be moved to recovery. Relief washed over the brothers like a breaking wave. Michael sank into a chair, covering his face with shaking hands. Aaron whispered a thank you to whatever force had kept Emily alive. Noah pointed toward the recovery wing, whispering "Mama" in a small, hopeful voice. But before the doctor could lead them to her room, another nurse hurried forward, her expression serious. She said the police had arrived and needed statements immediately. Daniel nodded, but the nurse's next words froze him. They had questions not only about Mark and Lena, but about someone else connected to the financial transfers. Lucas frowned, asking who. The nurse hesitated, looking directly at Daniel. She said the transfers suggested a third person had been helping Mark all along, someone none of them had suspected. The nurse's words struck Daniel like a blow. A third person. Someone working behind the scenes. Someone who had helped Mark funnel money, conceal messages, and manipulate the financial trail. The brothers exchanged tense glances, each silently running through the list of people close enough to Emily and Mark to slip under the radar. Michael asked the nurse who the police suspected, but she said they were still analyzing the transfers. Daniel felt a heavy chill crawl up his spine. Emily had already suffered more than any woman should, and now there was another shadow lurking behind her pain. As the brothers stepped toward the waiting area where officers were gathering, Noah clung tightly to Daniel, burying his little face into his uncle's shoulder. Daniel pressed a kiss on the boy's head, trying to steady himself. Lucas joined them, whispering that financial crimes often required someone with access, someone who knew the household, the accounts, or the routines, someone trusted, someone nearby. Aaron muttered that if another traitor emerged tonight, he wouldn't hold back. But Daniel reminded him that they needed facts, not rage. They had to protect Emily, not let anger cloud their judgment. The officers began questioning them, gently aware the family was traumatized. They asked about Mark's behavior in recent months, any unusual contacts, odd transactions, or unexplained absences. Daniel answered, carefully recounting the late nights, the excuses, the secretive phone calls. Michael described the way Mark stopped participating in family gatherings. Aaron mentioned overhearing him argue on the phone several times outside the house. But nothing in their recollections pointed to a clear accomplice. Then an officer mentioned something that made Daniel's breath hitch. One of the financial transfers had been routed through a small business account belonging to someone Emily had texted earlier that week, her longtime co-worker Hannah Pierce. At first, the brothers didn't understand. Hannah was the soft-spoken receptionist who often brought Emily homemade cookies and herbal tea. She was kind, sweet, always ready to help. Why would she be involved? The officer explained that the funds passed briefly through Hannah's account before being redirected to Lena. Whether Hannah knew or whether her account was used without permission remained unclear, but her name was now flagged. Daniel felt sick. Emily had trusted Hannah, confided in her, leaned on her emotionally. Could Hannah have betrayed her too? Lucas said it was possible Hannah had been manipulated or coerced. Michael disagreed. He said kindness didn't mean innocence. Aaron added that sometimes the quietest people hid the deepest secrets. But Daniel refused to believe Emily's friend would willingly hurt her. Still, doubt settled in the room like fog. Just then, a young officer approached, saying they had pulled building security footage from earlier that evening. The footage showed Mark pacing outside the clinic where Emily worked, receiving a small envelope from a woman who looked strikingly like Hannah. The officer said they were still analyzing the footage, but the timestamp placed the exchange shortly before Emily drank the tea that tasted different. Daniel's heart twisted painfully. He wanted answers, but he also wanted to protect Emily from further heartbreak. Lucas suggested they let the police investigate before making assumptions. Michael argued that if Hannah was involved, she needed to be confronted immediately. Aaron clenched his jaw, insisting no one else would harm their sister again. Noah whimpered softly, sensing the rising tension. Before the brothers could decide their next step, the recovery room doors opened slightly. A nurse gestured for Daniel to come closer. Her expression was hesitant, almost apologetic. She said Emily was awake, confused, weak but conscious, and asking for her brothers. Daniel felt relief crash over him like a wave, his knees nearly giving out. But the nurse's voice softened further as she added one more detail. Emily had whispered something important upon waking, something about the person who had handed her the tea earlier that day. And she said it wasn't Hannah. Emily lay in the recovery room, pale and exhausted but alive. When Daniel stepped inside carrying Noah, her eyes fluttered open, glassy with pain yet sharpened by something more than fear. She whispered his name, barely audible, then motioned for him to lean closer. Her voice trembled as she said the person who gave her the tea wasn't Hannah. Daniel froze, glancing at Lucas, who stood near the door. Emily took a shaky breath, insisting she remembered the scent of citrus perfume, the soft click of expensive heels, and a voice pretending to care. It wasn't Hannah at all. It was someone who had been hovering at the clinic earlier that day. someone Emily never imagined would dare step into her workplace. It had been Lena. Lucas exchanged a stunned look with Daniel. If Lena had gone to the clinic, it meant she stalked Emily long before the attack. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she recalled seeing a woman in a navy coat handing her a cup, claiming Hannah had stepped out for a moment. Emily didn't think twice. She trusted the clinic. She trusted the routine. She trusted kindness wherever it appeared. Lucas whispered that this changed everything. It meant Lena had begun her plan hours before Emily even arrived home. Aaron clenched his fists, muttering that this was premeditation in its purest form. Emily looked at Noah, who reached for her with a trembling smile. She stroked his hair weakly, whispering she was sorry he had seen so much fear. Daniel fought back his own emotions, assuring her none of this was her fault. Emily tried to speak again, but winced, gripping her blanket. Daniel told her to rest, but she insisted on finishing. She said Lena wasn't alone when she came to the clinic. She remembered seeing someone standing near the exit, someone who looked familiar. At first she couldn't place the face through her dizziness, but now as she whispered the memory aloud, her brothers felt the room tilt. It was Mark. Lucas's eyes widened. Daniel felt his pulse thrum painfully. Emily said Mark didn't speak to her. He only watched her from a distance. She thought he'd come to pick her up early, but instead he walked away the moment she drank the tea. Aaron whispered that Mark had essentially supervised the poisoning. Michael cursed under his breath, pacing the room. Emily's lips trembled as she said she remembered wanting to tell Mark she was proud of him for working so hard. She didn't know he had come, only to confirm the trap had been set. Daniel squeezed her hand gently, telling her she never had to see Mark again. Emily whispered something else, then something that made the air go cold. She said she heard Lena mention a meeting earlier that week, something about making sure the clinic part looks clean. The brothers stiffened. Lucas asked if Emily remembered anything else. Emily thought hard, her breathing shallow. She said she remembered Lena mentioning a name. Not Hannah. Not anyone from the clinic. Someone Mark trusted with numbers. Someone he called a safety net. A name Emily had heard before, but dismissed as unimportant. Her voice broke as she whispered it, Jeremy Cole. Daniel's stomach dropped. Jeremy was Mark's longtime friend, a financial advisor who often visited their home. He had always been polite, calm, helpful with taxes and paperwork. Emily never questioned his sincerity. Lucas whispered that if Jeremy was involved, he might have been the one structuring the transfers. Aaron muttered that betrayal always came dressed in kindness. Noah clung tighter to Emily's blanket. Just then, footsteps echoed in the hall. A police officer appeared at the door asking for the brothers. Daniel stood, bracing himself. The officer said they had located the third accomplice, and he was already inside the hospital. Jeremy had just checked in downstairs, claiming he came to support the family. Jeremy Cole walked into the hospital lobby as if nothing was wrong, his expression calm, polished, and exactly as Daniel remembered. But beneath that smooth facade, something darker seemed to pulse, a cold confidence that made Aaron's skin crawl. Michael spotted him first and stepped instinctively in front of the elevator, blocking his path. Jeremy paused, forcing a polite smile, the same one he used every year during tax season, when he pretended to care about Emily's family. Daniel approached slowly, Noah still perched on his hip, the toddler watching Jeremy with wide, uncertain eyes. Lucas arrived next, greeting Jeremy in a tone far cooler than usual, carefully studying every flicker of movement on the man's face. Jeremy acted confused, asking whether Emily was stable, pretending concern so smoothly it made Daniel's stomach twist. Aaron stepped closer, lowering his voice as he asked Jeremy why he had come without calling first. Jeremy shrugged, saying Mark had texted him earlier, claiming Emily needed support after a difficult day. The brothers exchanged sharp glances, realizing Mark had tried to plant another layer of manipulation. Lucas stepped forward and told Jeremy the police wanted to speak with him. Just routine questions, nothing alarming. Jeremy stiffened the first small crack in his mask, appearing like a shadow under bright light. He asked why officers needed him, insisting he barely spoke to Mark these days. But Daniel pressed harder, asking whether Jeremy had seen Lena recently or helped Mark with documents. Jeremy's eyes flickered a quick flash of panic he tried to hide by adjusting his tie. Michael noticed and stepped closer, his voice low as he asked about the money trail leading through a business account Jeremy supposedly managed. Jeremy's smile vanished, replaced by a tight swallow and a subtle step backward. Daniel blocked his retreat, telling him Emily was awake and had remembered something important about the tea she drank. This time, Jeremy's composure shattered completely, sweat forming at his temple as he demanded to see Mark. Aaron told him Mark was already in custody, leaving Jeremy alone with the truth he had helped fabricate. Jeremy insisted he only handled finances, never agreeing to harm Emily, but his trembling voice betrayed him. Lucas quietly informed him the police had reviewed the transfers and found his digital signature on the authorization forms. Jeremy froze, realizing there was no excuse that could save him from the consequences closing in. Daniel handed Noah to Michael, stepping forward until he stood inches from Jeremy, his voice steady but unforgiving. He told Jeremy that Emily had trusted him, and that betrayal carried a weight far heavier than any criminal charge. Jeremy's shoulders slumped as he realized the family he had deceived now held every piece of evidence needed to end him. Police officers finally approached, asking Jeremy to accompany them for questioning. But before they could escort him away, he whispered something chilling. He said Mark had promised that if anything went wrong, someone else would finish the job. Daniel demanded to know who that person was, but Jeremy only shook his head, saying the name would reveal itself soon. Officers led him away, leaving the brothers standing in the hallway with a new, colder fear creeping into their bones. Lucas urged everyone to stay close, warning that Jeremy's final words implied a fourth conspirator remained hidden and active. Daniel tightened his grip on Noah and felt a surge of determination rising, knowing they had to protect Emily until the entire truth surfaced. But deep inside, he feared the next revelation would cut even deeper than before. Tonight, Daniel stood frozen for a moment after Jeremy disappeared down the hallway with the officers. A fourth conspirator. The words gnawed at him like a warning carried on cold wind. Michael shifted Noah into a more comfortable position, whispering soft reassurances, even though the child's wide eyes showed he sensed something was wrong. Aaron rubbed a hand across his face, muttering that the nightmare was refusing to end. Lucas checked his phone, scrolling through notifications from hospital security and police dispatch, hoping for any clue about who might still be a threat. But the screen held nothing, only silence, and silence tonight felt dangerous. They walked back toward Emily's recovery room, stopping just outside the door. Daniel didn't want her hearing any more fear than necessary. She had survived surgery, lost a child, endured betrayal, and fought her way back to consciousness. Her heart needed peace, not another storm. Lucas said they should wait until officers confirmed Jeremy's statement before alarming Emily. Aaron agreed, though his fists remained clenched, his jaw twitching with held rage. A soft knock broke their tense circle. A nurse approached, carrying a tablet with a list of visitors who had checked into the hospital that evening. She said security noticed someone else had asked about Emily twice, once before surgery and again afterward. The name on the list made Daniel's breath hitch Claire Hart, Mark's younger sister, Emily's sister-in-law. The woman who had always worn kindness like jewelry, but whose smile never reached her eyes. Lucas muttered that Claire had access to both Emily and Mark. She knew their schedules, their accounts, their routines. Michael said she had been strangely distant for months, offering excuses to avoid family gatherings. Aaron recalled the way she used to defend Mark blindly, even when his temper grew sharp. Slowly, the pieces clicked together. Claire, the quiet observer, the one who pretended neutrality while choosing sides in silence. Before they could speak further, another notification appeared on the nurse's tablet. Claire had just entered the building again minutes ago. Daniel felt his heart slam against his ribs. Lucas signaled for hospital security, but the nurse said they were already being dispatched. The brothers moved into a defensive formation near Emily's door. Noah clung to Daniel's shirt, trembling. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Calm, unhurried. A woman turned the corner wearing a tailored coat and holding a small gift bag. Claire. Her expression was serene, almost delicate, as if she had come to offer condolences rather than tie loose ends. When she spotted the brothers, her smile faltered for only a fraction of a second. Daniel stepped forward, blocking her path. Claire blinked innocently, claiming she simply wanted to see Emily and Noah. But Lucas asked where she had been earlier that day. Claire dodged the question. Michael asked why she had moved money from Mark's account into her own 2 weeks ago. Claire claimed she was helping him with a family investment. Aaron mentioned Jeremy's confession. Claire's expression twitched. Finally, Daniel asked whether she had known about Mark's plan. Claire's facade shattered like glass. She said Mark was desperate, that he needed a future free from obligations, that she had helped only with the parts that didn't hurt anyone. Daniel's voice turned ice as he told her Emily had nearly died. Claire's lips trembled before twisting into something bitter. She whispered that Emily had never belonged in their family. Security rounded the corner, approaching quickly. Claire's eyes darted toward Emily's door, her breath sharpening. She took a step, as if to run, but Aaron blocked her. The guards closed in, taking her by the arms. Claire hissed that Mark had promised her protection. Daniel answered softly, firmly, that Mark couldn't protect anyone, not even himself. As security escorted her away, Claire turned back one last time, her expression hollow. She whispered that Mark's final plan hadn't ended, and someone else still held a key piece Emily didn't know about. Daniel felt Claire's final words lodge themselves in his ribs like a shard of glass. Another piece, another secret, another person tangled in Mark's web. He watched security lead her down the hallway, her heels clicking against the tile in a frantic rhythm. Michael held Noah tighter, rubbing the child's back as if trying to shield him from the tension thickening the air. Lucas pulled up the hospital's internal communication system, requesting surveillance from earlier in the evening. Aaron paced his movements, sharp, restless, fueled by fury he could barely contain. But Daniel stood still, his mind racing through every conversation, every strange detail, every name ever linked to Mark. Someone else still held a key piece. What did that mean? What piece? Lucas replayed Claire's last look. It wasn't the expression of someone bluffing. It was fear, real fear, as if she knew something explosive still hovered, waiting to detonate. Daniel stepped toward the window, exhaling into the cold glass. Outside, the lights of Manhattan glowed faintly against the night sky. How many more lies sat out there in that city? How many more endings did Mark try to write? A police officer returned, updating them on Jeremy's interrogation. Jeremy had finally admitted that he processed financial transfers under Mark's instruction, but he insisted he wasn't involved in any physical harm. He mentioned that Mark had given someone else the long-term plan after Emily delivered the baby, a plan involving custody assets and complete erasure of Emily's legal rights. But Jeremy claimed he didn't know the person's identity. All he knew was a phrase Mark used: the insurance. Daniel frowned. Insurance? Michael muttered that Mark treated people like objects he could rearrange. Aaron cursed under his breath. Noah whimpered softly, sensing the tension rising again. Daniel kissed the toddler's hair, whispering that Mama was safe now. But even as he comforted Noah, his chest tightened. He needed to know who the insurance was. A nurse approached gently to remind them that Emily needed rest and that only one visitor would be allowed at a time. Daniel nodded, asking Aaron to take Noah to the family lounge for a moment. He wanted his nephew away from the shadows, tightening around them. Lucas stayed behind, examining the security logs from earlier. Daniel stepped inside the recovery room alone. Emily lay under soft lighting, her face pale but peaceful. She turned her head slowly and whispered his name. Daniel pulled a chair close, taking her hand in both of his. She asked whether Noah was safe. He assured her he was with Aaron. Emily exhaled shakily, silent tears slipping down her temples. She whispered. She felt like someone had ripped her world apart. Daniel told her gently that the people who hurt her were being taken away one by one. She stared at him, searching his face, asking whether Mark was in custody. Daniel nodded. She asked whether Lena had been arrested. Daniel nodded again. Then, with a tremor in her voice, Emily asked the question he hadn't expected. Did they find my doctor? Daniel stiffened. Emily explained that earlier in the week she'd had a prenatal appointment that felt strange. Her doctor, Dr. Victoria Hale, had seemed unusually distant, distracted. She rushed through the exam, didn't ask Emily her usual questions, and insisted the pregnancy looked normal, despite Emily mentioning dizziness. Emily said she brushed it off. She trusted Dr. Hale implicitly. For years. But when the sedative began affecting her that afternoon, she remembered the faint taste of something bitter in the water offered at the clinic. She had assumed it was her hormones. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. Emily whispered that Dr. Hale had recently become unusually close with Mark, something she never questioned because she assumed it was related to insurance paperwork. Her voice cracked as she said she'd even thanked Dr. Hale for her kindness earlier that month. Lucas appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. He had just received the final surveillance image. Dr. Victoria Hale had entered the hospital 10 minutes ago, and she was asking for Emily by name. Lucas's words seemed to freeze the air inside the recovery room. Daniel stood so quickly his chair scraped across the floor, the sound sharp enough to make Emily flinch. He apologized softly, then turned toward the doorway where Lucas hovered, his eyes urgent. Emily's pulse monitor quickened, the steady beeping suddenly too loud. She whispered, "Why is she here?" barely able to form the words. Daniel squeezed her hand gently, promising she wasn't alone, that nothing would happen to her again. But inside, fear knotted tighter in his chest. Dr. Victoria Hale was more than a doctor tonight. She was the final shadow Mark had hidden behind. Out in the hallway, hospital security moved in quiet formation, but their presence did little to ease Daniel's dread. Michael and Aaron returned quickly with Noah, who clung to Michael's shoulder, rubbing his sleepy eyes. When Daniel explained what Lucas had discovered, both brothers stiffened. Aaron muttered that he knew something had felt off about that woman, and Michael whispered a prayer under his breath. Lucas held up the surveillance, still a grainy image of Dr. Hale entering the hospital lobby wearing a gray coat, carrying a clipboard, and looking as calm as if she were walking into a morning shift. Daniel handed Noah to Michael and stepped forward, but Lucas grabbed his arm. He warned that if Dr. Hale truly was part of Mark's plan, she wouldn't approach recklessly. She would have a reason for showing up now, a purpose, something unfinished. Daniel's jaw tightened. The thought of anyone trying to reach Emily again made his blood run cold. Hospital security escorted Dr. Hale down the hallway moments later. She walked with steady steps, her hair neatly pinned, her expression unreadable. When she saw Daniel and his brothers, she paused, tilting her head slightly, as if genuinely confused by the tension in the air. She greeted Daniel politely, asking how Emily's surgery had gone. The calmness in her voice sent a chill up Daniel's spine. It was too composed, too smooth, too rehearsed. Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he asked why she had visited the clinic earlier in the week outside her scheduled hours. Dr. Hale's eyes flickered just enough to betray something beneath the surface. She claimed she had been handling paperwork. Aaron stepped closer, demanding to know why Emily remembered her handing her water that tasted strange. Dr. Hale dismissed it as stress-induced imagination. Michael, unable to contain his anger, asked why she had met with Mark outside the clinic several times last month. Dr. Hale finally stiffened her voice, dropping asking whether they were accusing her of misconduct. Lucas stepped in, explaining the police had already uncovered sedative traces in Emily's system, and that the dosage suggested incite help. Dr. Hale's eyes sharpened. She said firmly that she was a physician, not a criminal, and that sedatives were tightly regulated. But when Lucas mentioned that her digital access code had been used to remove a dosage vial from the supply cabinet, her calm facade cracked. Daniel took a step forward, his voice low. He asked whether she understood Emily had nearly died. Dr. Hale opened her mouth, then closed it, her breath hitching. For the first time, fear flickered in her eyes, not guilt, but fear of exposure. She attempted to walk past them, insisting she needed to see her patient, but Aaron blocked her path. Security moved closer, sensing the shift. Dr. Hale whispered something, then so quietly only Daniel could hear. "I didn't know Mark would let it go this far." His blood ran cold. Michael demanded she repeat herself, but she shook her head and said nothing. Lucas signaled the officers, who approached with handcuffs. Dr. Hale panicked, trying to pull away, but the guards held firm. Her voice rose sharply as she protested, insisting she had only followed instructions, that Mark told her Emily was unstable and needed careful management. As she was led down the hallway, her calm demeanor collapsed entirely. She shouted that she never agreed to violence, that she only provided medical assistance. Daniel felt sick hearing the euphemism. Emily's life had become a checklist, a calculation, a medical risk managed by a corrupted hand. But just before the officers rounded the corner with her, Dr. Hale twisted back and screamed a final chilling sentence, one that stopped Daniel's heartbeat mid-step. She warned that Mark had left behind a final document, one that could still take Noah away from Emily forever. Daniel felt the warning strike deeper than any threat Mark had ever made. A document that could take Noah away. The very idea made his breath tighten, as if someone had closed a fist around his lungs. Michael clutched Noah protectively, sensing the shift. Aaron swore under his breath, pacing in tight circles like a man preparing for a fight he couldn't avoid. Lucas tried to steady them, but even he looked shaken. They had uncovered conspirators, exposed lies, and dragged the truth into the light. Yet somehow Mark had managed to leave behind one last dagger, aimed straight at Emily's heart. Daniel demanded details from the officers, but they only knew fragments. Dr. Hale had muttered something about a custody contingency, a legal maneuver Mark had arranged weeks earlier. Lucas suggested it might involve forged evaluations or manipulated medical reports. Emily, exhausted in her hospital bed, listened with widening eyes. She whispered that Mark had once joked about paperwork solving everything. None of them realized how literal that comment had been. A social worker arrived unexpectedly, carrying a sealed envelope addressed to the Hart family. She explained that the document had been delivered earlier and flagged by hospital administration. Daniel took the envelope, his hands trembling, and opened it slowly. Inside was a notarized petition. Mark had prepared a request for emergency temporary custody of Noah, claiming Emily was mentally unstable and medically unfit. The petition included forged signatures and a falsified psychological report. The brothers stared at it in stunned silence. Emily covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks as she shook her head helplessly. Lucas pointed out that the petition had never been filed but was scheduled for an automatic submission through an online system within 24 hours. If it processed, authorities would be obligated to investigate. Daniel felt fury burn through him, hotter than anything he had ever known. Mark had intended for Emily to lose her child whether she survived or not. Michael held Noah tighter, whispering soothing words the toddler didn't fully understand. Aaron muttered that every trace of Mark needed to be erased from their lives. Daniel demanded to know how to stop the submission. The social worker explained that they needed a judge's intervention before midnight. Lucas immediately called a contact he knew at the courthouse. Emily, trembling, whispered that she couldn't lose Noah, not after everything. Daniel knelt beside her and vowed she would never face this alone again. He promised her that Noah was safe, loved, and protected by every Hart brother with breath in his lungs. Within minutes, Lucas confirmed that a night judge was willing to review the case urgently. But they needed Emily's signature and her statement. Emily struggled to sit up, her body weak, but her determination fierce. Daniel supported her while she signed each page with trembling fingers. Once complete, Lucas rushed the documents to the courthouse, digitally praying the system processed everything in time. The room fell quiet afterward, the weight of the moment settling over them. Emily leaned back, exhausted, but for the first time since the attack, a spark of hope flickered in her eyes. Michael placed Noah beside her carefully, and the child nestled against her with a soft sigh. Aaron stood guard near the door, unwilling to let even a shadow approach. Then Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from Lucas appeared on screen. The judge had ruled. The petition was nullified. Emily broke into tears of relief as Noah wrapped his tiny arms around her neck. But Daniel knew the next step was coming. Mark would face them all in court. The courthouse felt colder than it should have, its stone hallways echoing with each step Daniel took as he guided Emily gently toward the family courtroom. She was still weak, her movements slow, but her eyes held a quiet fire the brothers had not seen in months. Noah sat in her lap, curled against her chest, thumb tucked into his mouth as if sensing the importance of the moment. Michael walked on her left, Aaron on her right, forming an unbreakable wall of protection. Lucas followed behind them, carrying neatly organized folders, evidence, medical reports, digital logs, and the flash drive Lena had handed over. Today was the day everything came into the light. Inside the courtroom, Mark stood at the defendant's table in a tailored suit, looking like a man who couldn't believe his world had collapsed. He glanced at Emily, something flickering in his expression, shock, perhaps disbelief, that she had survived. Beside him sat his attorney, flipping through paperwork that already looked outdated compared to the mountain of evidence the Hart brothers carried. The judge entered, a stern woman with silver hair and sharp, perceptive eyes. She assessed the room with the quiet authority of someone who had seen every kind of betrayal imaginable. The proceedings began with the judge acknowledging the emergency nature of the hearing. Mark's attorney attempted to object, claiming the evidence collected was circumstantial. But Lucas stepped forward confidently, presenting the flash drive medical lab results, surveillance images, and the digital signatures obtained during the investigation. The judge reviewed each file carefully. With every passing minute, Mark's shoulders tightened, his confidence unraveling thread by thread. Emily was asked to speak next. Daniel placed a gentle hand on her back as she rose. Her voice trembled, but she remained steady, recounting the attack, not with dramatics, but with the heartbreaking honesty of a woman who had survived something unimaginable. She described the tea, the dizziness, Lena's deliberate cruelty, and Mark's cold indifference throughout her pregnancy. Noah whimpered softly, burying his face against her shoulder as if remembering the fear he had witnessed. The judge watched intently, her expression hardening. Mark tried to interrupt, insisting Emily was exaggerating. But the judge silenced him sharply, stating that Emily had the floor. When she finished, Daniel helped her sit down gently. Then the judge called Lena to the stand. 2 officers escorted her in. She looked drained, resigned, as she confirmed everything: Mark's promises, his plans, the sedative, the financial transfers, and the conversations recorded on her phone. Mark's face blanched. His attorney tried to object again, but the judge overruled without hesitation. Next came Dr. Hale, escorted by officers. Her testimony was quieter, but equally damning. She revealed how Mark manipulated her with fabricated stories about Emily's mental health, convincing her to share medical information and prepare documents. She admitted she ignored her instincts because she believed Mark's lies. Emily stared straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge the woman who had betrayed her trust so deeply. When Jeremy was called, he tried to minimize his involvement, but the digital trail spoke louder than any excuse he attempted. With every testimony, Mark's mask cracked further. His arrogance dissolved into visible fear. He finally stood up, shouting that they were all conspiring against him, that Emily was weak and the brothers were controlling her life. The courtroom fell silent. The judge's eyes narrowed sharply. She announced her rulings one by one. Mark's custody petition void. His financial manipulation under investigation for felony fraud. His involvement in Emily's assault forwarded to criminal court. Restrictions placed full no-contact order with Emily and Noah. Emily exhaled shakily, her shoulders trembling with relief. Noah reached up to touch her cheek as if sensing her release. Daniel felt his chest loosen for the first time in what felt like years. But the judge wasn't finished. She declared that Mark would be taken into custody immediately pending trial. 2 officers approached him. Mark twisted, shouting Emily's name as if she owed him something. She didn't even look at him. She simply held Noah tighter. And for the first time, Mark realized he had lost everything, and Emily had finally won. The days after the hearing felt unreal for Emily. Even with Mark in custody and every accomplice exposed, she struggled to understand how life had shifted so violently in such a short time. The hospital slowly became less frightening as her strength returned, and with each passing day she found herself breathing a little deeper. Noah played quietly beside her bed, stacking plastic blocks into tiny towers, unaware of the storm that had raged around him. Daniel sat nearby each afternoon, giving her small updates, always careful not to overwhelm her with details. Yet beneath the calm, Emily felt something new growing inside her resolve. The kind she once believed belonged only to stronger women, not someone gentle like herself. She watched the sunlight pour through the hospital window and realized she was still here, still breathing, still holding her son. That truth alone became its own quiet victory. Her brothers noticed the shift too. Aaron told her she looked more alive than she had in months. Michael said Noah smiled more now that she did. And Daniel, always the protector, simply said he was proud of her. As discharge day approached, Emily worried about what waited outside the hospital walls. She feared the memories, the shadows, the broken pieces of a home that never truly protected her. But when she stepped into the cool morning air, supported by Daniel on one side and Aaron on the other, she realized something important. She wasn't returning to the life she had before. She was stepping into a new one. Her brothers drove her to their parents' old house, a quiet place in upstate New York filled with memories of warmth, safety, and simpler days. There she finally felt able to rest. Days turned into weeks. Emily rebuilt slowly, learning to trust her own strength again. She attended therapy, met with attorneys, and made decisions she once feared to face alone. Noah thrived in the peaceful environment, giggling during afternoon walks and snuggling beside her during quiet evenings. Sometimes Emily woke at night, grief pressing against her ribs as she remembered the baby she lost. But instead of breaking her, the sorrow shaped her. It reminded her she had survived. It reminded her she had value. And it reminded her that she deserved a future untouched by cruelty. One quiet afternoon, while sitting on the porch with a blanket around her shoulders, Emily heard footsteps on the wooden steps. She turned to see a familiar face, someone she hadn't expected but felt oddly relieved to see. Ethan Porter, the attorney Lucas had consulted during the custody crisis, stood with a soft smile and a folder tucked under his arm. He asked if she felt well enough to talk, promising it wasn't anything overwhelming. Emily nodded, surprised by how safe his presence felt. Ethan explained that the court had officially granted her full custody, permanently removing Mark's ability to challenge it. He handed her the signed order, its embossed seal catching the afternoon light. Emily's eyes filled with tears. For the first time, her future felt open, unthreatened, something she could shape with her own hands. Ethan stayed a while longer, helping Noah stack small wooden blocks, telling stories that made the child laugh. Daniel watched from the doorway, a knowing smile tugging at his mouth. He recognized something growing there, something gentle and hopeful, something Emily deserved. As the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the sky in soft gold, Emily felt a quiet certainty settle in her chest. Life had wounded her deeply, but it had not taken her spirit. Something new was beginning today. Winter melted into early spring by the time Emily felt ready to breathe, without the weight of her past pressing on her ribs. The quiet town, with its winding roads and soft morning light, offered a kind of peace she once believed existed only for other people. Each day she grew a little stronger, stitching her life back together with gentle hands and stubborn hope. Noah toddled beside her during morning walks, lifting his tiny arms whenever he wanted to be carried. Emily found comfort in his laughter, letting it remind her that innocence could survive even after the world had cracked open. She spent her afternoons on the porch wrapped in a light cardigan and watching birds hop across the yard. Healing didn't come in dramatic moments, but in quiet breaths, in stillness, in the gentleness she finally offered herself. Daniel visited every evening, checking the locks, asking if she needed anything, reminding her she was not alone. Michael cooked dinner, filling the house with comforting scents of warm bread and roasted vegetables. Erin made sure her car was safe to drive again, replacing parts without mentioning the cost. Their love rebuilt the foundation Mark had tried to shatter. Ethan visited often, though never with pressure or expectation. He arrived with gentle humor, warm coffee, and updates about her case. When she asked, sometimes they talked for hours about childhood memories, favorite books, or the small joys people often forgot to notice. Other afternoons they sat in comfortable silence while Noah played nearby. Emily felt something shift inside her, subtle but sincere. She trusted Ethan in a way that surprised her, not because he rescued her, but because he saw her, not the broken pieces, not the wounds, just her. And for the first time she allowed herself to be seen. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in soft gold, Ethan approached her with careful steps. He said he had news: final approval from the state confirming Mark's parental rights had been fully terminated. Emily covered her mouth, overwhelmed by the words she had prayed for. Noah reached for her, sensing her trembling joy. Ethan sat beside her, explaining gently that she no longer had to fear unexpected letters, hearings, or legal ambushes. Her future and Noah's belonged only to her now. Emily felt her breath loosen, as if a lifelong weight had finally lifted from her shoulders. Ethan hesitated then, as if gathering courage. He told her he admired her strength, not because she survived something terrible, but because she never let cruelty make her cruel. Emily felt warmth rise beneath her ribs, something tender and unfamiliar. When Ethan took her hand, he did so gently, giving her space to pull away. She didn't. Instead, she let their fingers intertwine, steady and warm. Noah babbled happily beside them, tapping his small shoes against the porch rail. Emily realized love didn't always arrive like lightning. Sometimes it came softly, in steady footsteps and patient hearts. That night, after Noah fell asleep and the house settled into quiet stillness, Emily stepped outside to look at the stars. She thought about the woman she once was, the one who apologized for existing, who whispered instead of speaking, who stayed quiet even as her world crumbled. She wasn't that woman anymore. She had walked through fire and come out whole. She had reclaimed her name, her voice, her child, and her future. When Ethan joined her on the porch, she leaned into him naturally, without fear. She knew healing was not a destination, but a journey she no longer had to walk alone. She finally felt home. So that's how the story closes, quietly, but with a strength that stays in your chest long after the last scene fades. And if you're still here with me right now, my friend, it means something in this journey touched you in a way only real life can. Maybe it reminded you that no matter how deep the hurt, the human heart has a way of mending itself. Maybe it whispered to you, like Marcus Aurelius once wrote, that the obstacle is the way. Emily's pain didn't end her. It shaped her, strengthened her, and guided her toward a life she truly deserved. And that's the message I want you to carry today. You are allowed to step away from what breaks you. You are allowed to rebuild. You are allowed to choose peace over chaos. And you are worthy of a future brighter than your past. If this story gave you hope, healing, or even a moment of reflection, then don't keep that to yourself. Like the Stoics reminded us, what stands in the way becomes the way. Share this message so someone else might find the strength they've forgotten. If you felt something tonight, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. We're building a place where stories heal, hearts grow, and no one walks alone.